All right, so we're ready to talk about risk and working capital in the supply chain, which I know is a bit of an oxymoron. Typically, those two things are in conflict with each other. But I've got a couple of experts with me today to show you how you can optimize both. Joining me is Melissa Dietz, who is our head of customer success, and Denny Ramos, one of our very excellent program directors here at Veresen. So with that being said, let's jump right in. Let's talk about supply chains and how they're a mess and how you don't have to accept that technologies are broken. So I won't go too much into detail on the current struggles that supply chains are experiencing. I think we're all kind of aware of what's going on in the world, but what I do want to focus on is kind of how you can set yourself up or your organization up for what you can do about it and where your priorities should be, specifically with the way the economy is rolling right now and how cost savings are going to be more and more important, but you don't want to accept additional risk in the supply chain. So we've got this boom in tech. There's innovation all over the place. We're seeing companies merge, acquire other technologies, ERP projects kicking off, which all of those things are great. We want to encourage innovation, digital transformations at the top of everyone's mind, but it can also create a real I'll say quagmire to get a word that you don't hear often. It can create a real issue with your data, and what that leads to is potential issues and risk down the road with unplanned downtime when you don't have what you need where you need it, etc. So let's jump right in. Melissa, Danny, thanks for joining me today. And real quick, I talked about the supply chain really high level, but I want to kind of dive into the weeds with you guys. Is there any one pressing concern related to supply chain that you think is driving pressure? And do you think that there's an end in sight with this pressure? Melissa, let's start with you.
Yeah, Crawford, I wish I knew if there was an end in sight. Who knows, right? Your guess is as good as mine. But I think when I think about what's really driving supply chains, it's that geopolitical pressures that we see. And what ends up happening is people are now struggling with, hey, I can't get the raw materials I need to make my product. And when they do make it, hey, I can't get the transportation to get it out the door. So it's what that ends up happening is creating really severe lead time variability throughout the supply chain, and that's the real challenge, because when you have long or high variability in lead times, now it's really hard to predict and plan for what customers want. And ultimately, what you see down the stream is I have inventory, but sometimes it's inventory of the wrong thing. So I plan for what I think is going to happen. What actually happens when consumers go to buy, I have too much of one thing, not enough of the other, and it creates the issues we see today.
Yeah, no, that's a really fantastic point. And is there, this might be too much of a question, but is there any way that we can not predict lead times, but kind of more buffer ourselves from those efforts without just bloating our inventory?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's all about the game of managing risk, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what you do is you look at your lead times. I think there are two things that have to happen. One, you have to have relatively up-to-date data. So in the past, I could use my rolling average from over the last year to figure out what my lead time is going to be. That's not the case anymore. I'm almost looking at a month, if I'm lucky, right, in arrears, maybe 60 days. And so trying to pull in that quicker, better data, and a lot of times I have to hook up to suppliers to do that directly. And then using really advanced analytics, I think can help you balance that risk and give you a better point of view of where you might be.
I love it. Yeah. And those advanced analytics are so critical, especially when you talk about, kind of creating this central network based inventory model. And Danny, you and I have talked about this a bunch over the past couple of weeks, but can you kind of dive in real quick on this network-based model and why, looking at your inventory grand scale versus facility by facility, can you talk a little bit about how much that can, not only reduce risk, but also just give you a bit more wiggle room?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, I mean, I think the idea of networking facilities together certainly isn't new and isn't anything that's kind of emerged as a result of some of the uncertainty. What I think the biggest transition has been what has gone from kind of this nice to have, potentially a competitive advantage, is now moved very squarely into the realm of you have to do this to make sure that your business stays afloat. And the kind of the network approach is a really great way to mitigate some of the lead time issues that Melissa was just talking about, because if you have better visibility into what other facilities have, you can plan a bit more appropriately, and you can make sure that you have some coverage. I think the interesting thing with that as well is it's a more efficient utilization of your existing inventory. So as you're looking to reduce, your working capital, you can kind of, burn down that working capital while still ensuring that your resilience and your risk mitigation practices are kind of really, really top notch. But one of the really kind of fascinating challenges that we've seen, especially in talking to customers and prospects about this transition to network-based models, is that a lot of them, of varying levels of maturity in terms of their inventory management processes, almost all of them are starting with kind of a data pilot process where before they move into physically moving inventory from one facility to another, sharing inventory between facilities, they're starting with, kind of building out the business case for doing so, utilizing some of those advanced analytics that y'all were mentioning. One of the challenges that they're running into, though, is that this process is really manual. And in some cases, we've in talking to different prospects and customers, we hear ranges from anywhere from, we expect 3 to 6 months to start to get to meaningful analysis for a small pilot project of 4 or 5 facilities, to others that are expecting something along the lines of 18 to 24 months before they can even wrap up the data phase of this process. And obviously, in a world that's shifting, seemingly by the hour, right? Like 18 to 24 months is a really, really long time to get started. And to get validation that the idea that you have is probably a good one.
Yeah, I did open with that with data, disparate data being such a problem. 18 to 24 months, not acceptable. Right? I mean, if you look back at what's happened, in the last 18 months, and what potentially could happen in the next 18 months, is there a realistic time frame for how long that should take versus what people expect?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to kind of hear Melissa's take on this as well. But from my perspective, I think it's really kind of going to depend, right? Like it's going to depend on the maturity of your existing data infrastructure. It's going to depend on the maturity of your existing inventory management processes. If obviously, kind of the more mature you are, the further along the digitization journey you are, the easier it is to kind of take that next step into truly digitalized supply chains. So as far as being able to say it should be kind of this time frame or that, I don't know if that's the case, but we certainly hear that it is long and tedious and manual, most of all, in terms of getting to the stage where you can do any kind of meaningful analysis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the other thing I would add in there too, there's an element of trust, right? So if you think about, we talked about earlier, one of the ways to get better data is you have to be very connected to your suppliers and to your customers, and to start trading that data across digitally requires that you have trust between everybody in that ecosystem. So having a good visibility and having a platform that provides that is so important, right? So that everybody
Definitely
can get on the same page.
Yeah, you could even say it's a material trust.
There you go. There you go.
So for those not in the know, material truth is something that we pitch here pretty heavily. So no, great start to the conversation. I want to kind of shift industry specific. We've seen a lot of price jumping in agriculture, in oil and gas, energy. These companies are dealing with insane supply issues, whether that's demand ramping quickly or dropping off quickly. Everyone's looking for the cheapest option, and then you've got layoffs kind of growing nationwide, globally, more predicted. Households are going to start pulling back. How do you kind of adjust for this insane shift in demand, whether it's surging like we saw as COVID kind of relaxed and people started driving again, this surge in demand on oil and gas, or on the other side of people are starting to be a bit more conservative with their spending? How do you deal with this insane shift in demand? And I know that this is not a demand planning conversation, but almost more a supply planning conversation, right? So specifically with supply planning, Danny, tell me a little bit about visibility, real-time insights, and how you're looking at your current supply. How does that kind of shift what you do to make sure that you have what you need where you need it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, visibility is clearly a problem, right? Like in just kind of by virtue of the way that a lot of the digitization efforts over the last 10, 15, 20 years have taken place, have been very focused on kind of individual facilities. And in that regard, it's difficult to kind of connect the dots unless you have a tool that does that for you. And, Gartner released their top 25 supply chains of 2020 recently. And one of the things that was across, I think it was something like 88, 90% or whatever of the folks that were on that list were focusing on visibility specifically as a challenge area that they wanted to improve on. And I think the interesting thing as well is they were doing that through various forms of automation. So I think that's, kind of the way that you start that process is try to automate and simplify some of that visibility. And what that ends up doing is enabling kind of the human beings, as it were, on the other side of the screen to make those smart decisions and get to decisions more quickly, both in times of crisis when a line goes down and you need to get it back up and running, but also kind of in times of more strategic planning, because if you have a better sense of what's available, to Melissa's point earlier, you can plan appropriately and you can adjust your strategies accordingly.
Thank you. Yeah, and specific to what's available and what's not available. Now, a lot of what we see is companies will just bloat their inventory, right? They don't want to risk not being able to find the piece. They don't want to risk fluctuating lead times going from a week to 6 weeks to 6 months. So bloating inventory is definitely an option. It's an expensive one, and given that I would imagine CFOs everywhere are going to start paying a lot of attention to the bottom line. Danny, can you talk to me a little bit about how you can shore up these processes without purely just bloating your inventory when we know that, hey, profit right now is paramount, whether it's, adjusting your cost to serve or whatever. How do you stop bloating inventory, especially at the what I would call the top of the supply chain, the MRO piece, the maintenance piece, the spare parts piece?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, great question. I mean, obviously with kind of any of these economic downturns, like one of the first things that folks are going to be trying to do is shrink that working capital and eliminate some of that kind of high level risk that comes with bloated inventory and kind of the bloated financial position that you put yourself in as a result of that. And this is really where I think, being able to make it simpler for folks at the facility to understand what's around them helps out a ton. And MRO in particular is a really kind of a fascinating place to start because first off, it's less risky than trying to introduce changes to your direct material management process. There's just, it's a little bit safer. Folks already have bloated inventories. So in that sense, you already have a little bit more kind of protection baked in. But it's also a good place where you can start to introduce kind of the new kinds of collaboration that are going to be necessary going forward in a more uncertain world. Because, as we mentioned, a lot of these operations have been kind of handled in silos, right? Where individual plant managers or individual storeroom managers have the authority to determine what is in their inventory. And they, so, with that hyper focus on kind of what's in my own four walls, you end up making decisions that make a ton of sense, right? Like logically, it makes a ton of sense to stock up on a bunch of inventory if you don't think you can get it. But if you can feel very confident, you have the trust that you can, call somebody up the street or pop into a tool like Verasyn and find, the material you're looking for, in another facility, it's a little bit easier to make, those kinds of choices where maybe we don't need to buy every single spare part we can get our hands on for this machine. Like we could probably be okay avoiding some approaches that we've heard. And that's something that we've certainly heard from clients where they'll say, we'll buy every spare part we can get our hands on for this machine because the asset is so critical. The parts are so difficult to find. If they come up, we're going to buy everything. And you don't really have to do that any longer if you can, get a sense of a clearer sense of what you already have.
And that's, I love the way you put that because it immediately takes me back to where we started with a network-based approach to inventory. If I'm running an operation with 20 facilities, I'm often competing with my own sister facilities on parts. I might be raising prices. I might be putting other facilities below their min-max threshold on their SLAs. So this idea of not bloating one facility, but making sure that every facility has access to exactly what's in stock and where it is, you really kind of prevent price bloating, you prevent lead time issues. And Melissa, specifically with your history, I know that this is something you've dealt a lot with. Talk to me about how, this network piece, specifically in MRO, you can reduce the risk, but you can't do that if you're not optimizing your MRO materials, right? So talk to me about optimization and how that kind of impacts production goals.
Yeah, great question, Crawford. I mean, as we talk about, the one thing that sprung to mind, we used to have a saying at my old company that inventory was really, really expensive insurance, and that's kind of the goal that we have in mind, right? And what you're trying to do is, obviously with MRO, it's so critical. It's prevalent. It's often not thought of, but it's so critical to your lines, because you don't want a multi-million-dollar line going down because you don't have a $10 O-ring in stock, right? That's your worst case scenario. So it's how do I balance that without overdoing it on the expensive inventory or insurance piece, right? And to me, it's really looking at gathering a bunch of data. So in the past, we could manage this when lead times were relatively stable, but now you've got to look at, hey, well, what are my lead times doing? What's the criticality of my parts? Just like Danny talked about, what's my demand patterns for that? Or is there seasonality? And you need to have that all real time. So we're quickly moving from a linear program that I can do in Excel to a non-linear thing that I really have to have more robust systems to take a look at.
Love it. And when you talk about non-linear robust systems, is this specific to ERPs? I know that this is not a simple solution that companies are trying to solve. This is a very advanced solution. And, the traditional path has always been data cleanse, right? We've got 30 facilities and they're all calling parts different things. And so you bring in a third party and they clean up all your data. Talk to me about how that works, or how that used to work. Or maybe it didn't, but talk to me how do these disconnected systems kind of pull together a complete picture of data to do a data cleanse, and why that is no longer really a solution?
Well, the challenge with the data cleanse, even back in the day, is as soon as you're finished, it's obsolete, right? And that's because you're taking a point in time, trying to get all the data harmonized, and as soon as the next part goes in, you might have completely blown up your harmonization. So what ends up happening, I remember I worked at a company that grew by acquisition, so lots of different systems had to come in play, and we would do this, or I would manage the supply chain by looking at probably 20 screens of Power BI dashboards. So that's how we did the visualization. We had to do it in disparate systems with disparate screens and try to aggregate them all in one place, usually using a lot of pretty complex Excel spreadsheets, right? And having the power to get all that data so that it harmonizes real time and continuously is really the key. And then Danny's pointed this out too. If I can take those 20 Power BI dashboards and put them into one pane of glass where everybody's seeing the same thing at the same time, it's really powerful, because a lot of times, even when you get things on one pane of glass, it would be a static look at it. And sometimes, somebody would be looking at data that's 2 hours old and others would have data that's a week old. And it was so hard to get everybody on the same page, right?
I love it. Yeah. And now, Danny, you kind of touched on that earlier, because one of the things that you said that really kind of interested me was that MRO specifically is not a focus, right? Operations managers, they may be focused on the direct materials or the finished goods. And now, can you talk to me about why that's not the best approach, and you need a more wholesale view on what your materials look like across your facilities?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think, kind of the most obvious reason as to why you need that is exactly the example that Melissa, kind of mentioned earlier, where you don't want a multi-million-dollar line going down because you're missing a $10 part. You know what I mean? That is the worst case scenario, is that something that is, relatively simple fix causes major kind of out of whack, out of proportion impacts down the line. But I mean, I think you need that holistic view, because if the lines aren't up, it doesn't matter what your raw material situation looks like, because you can't run the lines anyway. You know what I mean? So in that sense, like, that's where MRO becomes really important. But kind of as we mentioned, it's easy to understand how it kind of gets put in the back corner, because it's the thing at the end of the line that's really interesting and really exciting, what it is that consumers are buying and spending their money on. But kind of piggybacking off of what Melissa said from a data cleanse perspective, that problem gets worse too when you go across multiple facilities and things like that, because then it's not just it's bad news because you've done a data cleanse in one place and you're in a good spot, and then the next day happens and your inventory changes and you're kind of back to square one. That problem gets multiplied by every facility that you have. So for every facility, there's 20 screens of its own. For every facility, there's, a small cottage industry and advanced Excel spreadsheet building. There's all of these things that have to happen facility by facility by facility if you're not looking at an overarching view of the enterprise as a whole.
Yeah. And one thing you said really made me kind of chuckle a bit. Our friends over at Supply Chain Now, we've talked with them about this, and Greg White, I'll never forget his quote. He said, "It doesn't matter, if you've optimized your finished goods, it doesn't matter, because if your MRO isn't running lean and mean, you're not going to have finished goods to optimize." And I'm sure I butchered the quote, but it's a real
The gist was there.
It's a real great way to think about it. Is if your MRO, if your plants aren't up, it doesn't matter what else is optimized.
That's right.
So we've identified the problem. Let's talk about what solutions look like, what's good look like versus better. Danny, you brought up Gartner earlier. Their 2022 predictions indicate that 90% of supply chain execs are recognizing the importance of adopting emerging technologies. And me specifically, as I'm looking through annual reports and 10Ks and things like that, I'm consistently seeing stuff about digital transformation, about innovation in the supply chain. We've all seen the buzzwords behind AI and machine learning and natural language processing, and we're rapidly kind of realizing that this isn't a problem that any single human can solve, or any single group of humans, right? We have to scale it significantly higher than that. So Danny, I'm going to start with you. Can you talk to me a little bit about technology and supply chain networks? What should a supply chain professional be looking for? What is really going to drive the needle over the next 12, 18, 24 months?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. I mean, I think, in that same kind of Gartner piece that I referenced earlier, their language was very interesting to me because they, mentioned it, human-assisted automation, which I think is really what folks need to be looking for over the next, 12, 18, 24 months as they're adopting new technology, right? Like, the biggest allure of kind of the AI and the ML and kind of these buzzwords that we hear is that those systems are able to crunch through data at speeds and at scale that human brains simply can't, right? So what those do is they do a great job of kind of spitting out the anomalies that you need the humans to kind of come together and collaborate on to make sure to understand, that they can take the next step and make kind of those next actions. I'd say, practical automation is kind of what you're looking for, particularly around data aggregation that's going to alleviate some of the tedium, that Melissa was just talking about having to cram a bunch of spreadsheets together and do all that stuff. And then the other piece on that is looking for those tools that foster some of that collaboration. Any one of these, these digitalization efforts can only take you so far if you focus just on the technology. The biggest challenge with these is very rarely the technology piece, very much more so the kind of culture shift that has to happen alongside them. So looking for technologies that facilitate that collaboration, give people a place where they can come together and see all of the information that they need in one place and kind of sing off the same sheet of music, as it were, is going to be a big driver, because that's how you start to get some of the cultural shifts and some of the change management pieces that you need to have with these processes. That's how you get that to happen. So I'd say focus on automation that aggregates your data and makes that kind of the tedium of that data analysis simpler, and then something that creates those collaboration opportunities in kind of natural and organic ways.
Thank you. I love it. And Melissa, I'm going to throw the same question to you. What would you add on to Danny's take on what supply chain professionals should be looking for?
Yeah, Danny, I loved your idea of a tool that provides that area for collaboration. I mean, especially if you think about as the workforce turns over, you need a way to capture that native knowledge and make sure that it's sitting in your platform as opposed to walking out the door in somebody's head. So having a tool that provides that consistent process helps so much with that change management and allows people to move on into different roles as well. I think really then when you think about kind of at the high level what I want, your question comes down, do I want a purpose-built solution? Do I want a solution that does everything? And my experience has been those large solutions that can do one of 100 things are really okay at all those 100 things. And okay was probably fine when the world was relatively stable. But as you start getting hiccups, right, that's when you really need a solution that's really, really good at what you want it to do. And that's where we're seeing these purpose-built solutions really fitting in. So they're solutions that are designed exactly for what you need them to do, and they're excellent at it. And I think that's what, with a dynamic environment, that's really what is critical.
Excellent, thank you. And so we've already got a couple of questions here coming in, and I'm going to try to weave them in because the next section that we're going to talk about is specifically what purpose-built looks like. We've heard a lot about the challenges in supply chain. We've already talked about some of the things you can do to address those challenges. Danny, can you talk to me specifically about what Verison's doing, how we're helping our customers, and as you're kind of talking through that, I'm going to try and weave in a couple of these questions that we've had come in. See how I can multitask here.
Absolutely, yeah. So as far as what Verison is doing is we're helping folks try to kind of tackle this exact problem that we've been talking about for the last 30 odd minutes here, right? So we're trying to help improve the visibility and collaboration, both within individual facilities, but also across enterprises as a whole. We're utilizing advanced data science and artificial intelligence techniques to comb over data, kind of at speeds faster than the human mind can. But also, kind of one of the nice things about being a purpose-built solution, to Melissa's point, is that we're able to learn both from a data science, but also from kind of a best practices perspective, from all of the different customers that we're working with, and feed that back into the solution. So we're taking, best practices across industries. We're taking, models and techniques that are utilized across different industries and packaging them all up in one kind of pre-built solution that folks can pick up and implement into their systems really, really quickly.
Yeah, talk to me a little bit more about that, because that's actually shockingly close to this first question. The question they asked was, why should I come to you when I've got my own dedicated team of data scientists? We understand our data better than anyone. It sounds like you're saying Verison's bringing additional insights to the table because we're seeing other advanced models. Is that right?
Well, so yeah, I mean, kind of to that point, right? You can certainly go through the process, and a lot of folks have, and it makes a ton of sense, right? To make that investment in the data science team, bring your own, kind of AI machine learning smarts to the table. You will know your own data better than anybody else. But this is where I think, to your point, Crawford, kind of where I was mentioning the view across multiple user or multiple companies that Verison has is just going to provide you better visibility than what you can get out of an individual kind of in-house team that's going to be hyper focused on your own business. We can just kind of see more from where we're positioned, and we can adjust more quickly to some of those trends that you might miss, because with good reason you're kind of hyper focused on your own kind of corner of the world.
Yeah, it sounds like AI is only as good as its data. And so when you're only focused on your internal data, you just have less to learn from, right? And this isn't a case of, because I know that this is where I was confused originally. This is not a case of you getting an advantage from like a competitor's data. It's more of a case of, we've solved this specific issue with a couple of new models that we developed for other companies, and those models may lend themselves to be useful. Mm-hmm. Okay, excellent. And then specific to, this is the next question, I think by the same person. The solution sounds great. How are you ensuring change management and new processes to make the solution implementation successful? So if I'm understanding that correctly, it sounds like they're saying, okay, you've fixed the data, you've made these recommendations and they've been accepted. How do you kind of ensure that those new decisions are implemented across the organization? And Melissa, this may be a question more for you.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'll grab that one, Crawford. We'll let Danny off the hook for this one. So, there are a couple different ways to do that. I mean, first off, understand that, hey, we're Verison and the customer success team. We have you. We're here to make sure that you're really successful with the solution and that you're getting the value you want. There are also great ways to automate, or I'll call it semi-automate, the recommendations that your team has agreed to, making sure they're getting uploaded into your ERP. Usually that's done through an RPA or a bot. So we try to make it seamless for you so that when you identify the areas of opportunity, you can get them implemented quickly and easily.
Love it. And that leads me to one more question. So What about unplanned downtime? You know, we talked about cleaning the data. We talked about implementing these change metrics, which is great. But unplanned downtime is almost inevitable. I don't want to say it's inevitable. You know, as we kind of get more advanced, we can better understand and mitigate those things. But Melissa, let's start with you. How do we kind of address unplanned downtime? How does a disruption change your strategy and focus?
Yeah, it's a great question, Crawford. I mean, at the end of the day, this is we've seen one of the real advantages of having a network view across your organization, because if you have it's rare that you have an interruption at all your sites at the same time. So let me start there. And we have an actual example where we had one of our customers, a critical line went down at one of their plants. They called the vendor to get a replacement part, and it was going to be, let's call it, multiple weeks, right? 4 to 6 weeks. Went into the Verison tool, did a quick search, found that part at a sister facility and could quickly overnight it. So instead of being down for weeks, they were down for a handful of hours. And that's one of the powers of having the network and sister plants, and the visibility to them, as well as the ability to do a quick search. I don't know if anybody out there has done an SAP search, and I'm not trying to pick on them, but their search is very specific how you look for things. Having a Google adjacent search where you can put in rough things and come up with all the parts across your system is so key to keeping everybody up and running, and it's that support of your entire network.
Yeah, I think the term I've heard thrown around is a fuzzy logic search, right? Because it's not just searching one facility; you're searching severals, and let's be honest, these facilities are run by humans, and humans make mistakes when they're entering their inventory and things like that. So this allows you to kind of look through those errors. Now, talk to me about this, because we've talked about how you deal with disruptions, and we've talked about the importance of change management and the importance of data quality. How do you implement a solution like this when everything's on fire all the time, right? We have all these issues. We have black swan events happening seemingly every couple months. And Danny, you kind of opened the conversation with, it can take 12 months for a company to get their data in the right place. Now, how can we kind of speed those things up? Because what you don't want to have happen is, well, we have all these issues that we have to solve right now, so we don't have time for a project like bringing on a Verison type tool. And Melissa, I'm going to throw it to you. Let's talk about that runway of implementation. What does that look like with a tool like Verison?
Yeah, the nice part about Verison is we are trying to make it as painless on you as humanly possible. So the runway will look like, on average, it's about 90 days from, hey, we want to use Verison, to we actually are in the system and gaining value. That'll plus or minus depending on how quickly customers get us data. But really what we're trying to do to make this easy is we work directly with our customers. We lay out timelines that we all agree to, make sure that we have cross-functional representation at the customer, so everyone's on board, make it very clear what the milestones are, and then we assign you a customer success manager that stays with you the entire time, make sure things are moving smoothly, and that we understand all the critical things that you're trying to get out of the system, and that we're driving to success against those measures.
Excellent. And Danny, this next one's for you. So Melissa really focused on, it can depend on how long it takes the customer to export and give us the data. Once that happens, right, what's the process look like? We've received the customer's data. This is not a 12 to 18 month data cleanse, right? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things I think is really compelling about the Verison solution is that you can get to different forms of value pretty quickly without having to do any additional work. So immediately, kind of on the other side of that 90-day window that Melissa's talking about, you're already positioned to kind of resolve downtime issues in the way that she just described, right? At the end of that 90 days, if you have a line go down, there's somebody who can get into Verison and immediately identify, matching or at least potential duplicates to kind of resolve that issue. So in terms of time to value, it's very quick in that visibility kind of arena specifically. And from there, we've made the product as kind of as easy to use as possible, as Melissa's indicated, so that really users don't have to spend a lot of time being trained on it. It's pretty intuitive and easy to grasp. all of the training and all those kinds of things notwithstanding that we do for customers, like folks typically don't have a hard time kind of picking it up and understanding, oh, okay, so here's where you're telling me these materials might be the same thing. I can pretty easily glean whether or not they are or not and kind of move on to the next thing. The inventory parameter recommendations that we make are really straightforward and easy to use because everybody has all of the information that they need to make a decision about a particular material in a single card. And they can drill in to get more information, and all of this without having to necessarily reference back to their source system and their source ERP to get PO history or issue history, any of that kind of stuff, because that's all available and visible in the Verison platform. So in terms of time to value, and you're immediately improving your risk mitigation abilities by virtue of getting us your data, and then it's really incremental value that you pick up, really at every step along the way afterwards.
I love it. Love it. Well, hey, Danny, Melissa, I really appreciate you taking the time today. I certainly feel empowered. We talked about risk and capital, and I know that those things seem in conflict, but it's apparently not the truth. So thank you both for your expertise, your insights today. Thanks to everyone who joined us online. We'll be following up with an on-demand recording of today's call. And please, we welcome you to connect with us on LinkedIn. You can find Verison on LinkedIn, Danny's on LinkedIn, Melissa's on LinkedIn. I share some fun stuff as well. So, please reach out. We look forward to speaking with you guys again soon. Thanks, guys.